Hi, you're listening to Immigrant Women Talk podcast, and I'm your host, Galina Bilaeva. This is the place for you to get inspired by stories of immigrant women, to learn about nonprofits that serve immigrant communities, and to listen to entrepreneurs who work with women in developing countries. Subscribe to this podcast and get more inspiration and resources at immigrantwomentalk.com and galinabilaeva.com. Hi, I'm Galina Bilaeva, and my guest today is Amaha Kassa, a first-generation Ethiopian immigrant in the USA. And Amaha has over 15 years experience as a labor and community organizer, nonprofit director, and social entrepreneur. Amaha is the founder of African Communities Together, and that's an organization that supports and empowers Africans in America and on the African continent. Welcome, Amaha. Great to have you.
Very glad to be with you.
So who does your organization serve?
We serve immigrants from Africa in the United States and their families. So we're mostly focused on first-generation immigrants, folks who were born in sub-Saharan Africa, and second-generation immigrants, the children of those born in Africa. And we launched here in New York City about a year ago. And so right now we're working mostly with communities in the Bronx and Harlem. So folks coming from Ghana in West Africa, also a number of French-speaking West African countries, including Senegal, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, a number of other countries.
Why did you decide to start African Communities Together?
Well, this is a long-term project and really a dream for me to be working in my own community. I'm a first-generation African immigrant. I was born in Ethiopia as a child and came to the U.S. as a little kid. And you know, I've been incredibly fortunate in a lot of ways. The national debate about immigration reform has not had a lot of African immigrant voices as part of it. So that's really all the way back in 2001 that first started thinking about this concept, and have in the meantime talked with a lot of folks, picked the brains of a lot of smart people to try to get ideas for how to go about doing this, and ended up launching just about a year ago with the help of a fellowship from a foundation called Echoing Green that supports social entrepreneurship, along with the Open Society Foundation, which supports a lot of progressive grassroots organizing around the country. They have a project called the Campaign for Black Male Achievement that supports organizations serving Black men and boys. And those two foundations were the initial funding to get my organization off the ground.
Right. So are you talking about specific cities where you're going to serve African communities?
Yes, right now our focus is on New York City and building a membership base and a chapter here in New York. In the Bronx and South Harlem is primarily where the South Bronx and Harlem is primarily where we're working. But there are emerging or even established African immigrant communities in a number of large metropolitan areas around the country. The top cities include Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York, obviously, Houston, which a lot of people are surprised to learn has a large African immigrant population, and of course the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, where actually you saw for the first time an African immigrant be elected to local government, a seat in the city council and there. So that's it's a big deal. It's the beginning of a breakthrough in a lot of ways. So yes, we definitely have larger aims, but we're really also trying to build deep and be really deeply rooted in the communities where we're working.
So what are the specific needs and challenges that immigrants from Africa face?
Mm-hmm. So immigrants from Africa share challenges with many other immigrants coming to the U.S., especially low-income immigrants. The classic basic human needs. finding a job, finding a job at a living wage that allows one to support oneself. That's especially challenging if people lack proper documentation, if they aren't authorized to be in the country. There are a lot of immigrants from Africa who are in status, who are permanent residents or authorized residents, and there are people, they're not maybe not as visible as the undocumented population in other communities, who don't have their papers. Housing is a major issue. We encounter a lot of African immigrants who don't know their housing rights. They may be in a sublet where they're not on the lease officially, and so they actually don't have some of the rights they would be if they had a signed lease in their housing. And we encounter unscrupulous landlords who don't make repairs that they're required to do or wrongfully evict people. And unlike, and so those are challenges that are really common to a lot of immigrant communities. I think some things that are distinctive challenges facing the African immigrant communities, there tend to be fewer services focused on and directed towards this community because it's relatively newer, because it's smaller, maybe because it's more diffuse, and so people don't have the language skills or the cultural competence to serve this community. So I think compared to other other communities, what we've heard from service providers on the ground is people are less likely to know where to go, that there aren't quite the same networks that get information out. And so for example, people will do a citizenship event or an event helping people for free with immigration assistance, and they will get even if they advertise it to African immigrant communities, they'll get more people showing up from other immigrant communities than from African immigrant communities. Not because the need isn't there, but because the awareness isn't there. I think one thing that's also distinctive about African immigrant communities and tells is I think a telling thing. African immigrants as a group have very high educational attainment. Education is something that people are invested in. Oftentimes, it's only some of the most educated folks who can actually make it all the way to the U.S. from Africa. So you look at for example, the proportion of African immigrants that have at least 1 year of college, and it's higher than average for American society, and it's actually on a par with other groups like Asian Americans. So that's a phenomenal asset. That's a great thing. But another kind of startling statistic about African immigrants is that we actually get a worse return for our educational attainment than any other ethnic group. So for example, if you're a native-born African American and you get yourself a college degree, your wages will go up by 25%. If you're an African immigrant, the wage bump that you get is half that. So there's clearly something that's broken, that's a disconnect, whether it's happening in the networks through which people get hired or other things that are happening with employers and in the labor market. People are working hard, they're investing in their education, they're being very entrepreneurial. African immigrants are extremely entrepreneurial, but they're not always getting the kind of return on the American dream that they expected, that they dreamed of. So we have a long way to go.
I read your article, an article about you on Echoing Green, and you said that African immigrants, they have a feeling of refugees in the U.S., so they want to go back home. Why is that?
Yes, I think it varies a lot by particular communities. Some communities it's stronger than others. But yes, a lot of you talk to African immigrants, and there's often a sense or a belief that what they're doing is working here, living here in the U.S. temporarily, and they're going to save up and take that. Money home to Africa, that they're going to retire there or have their business there. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and I think some of them are positive. People have strong family networks and strong cultural ties to the country of their birth. But I think, frankly, there are some negative factors, which is African immigrants often experience a big loss of prestige, of cultural status when they come to the U.S. That they're, relatively, high status in Africa,
And then they have to go and start from scratch, basically.
exactly, they find themselves here at the bottom, and it's difficult and it's a struggle. So I think, frankly, as I was saying, I think that many times they lack, we lack the means of integration. So they would like to integrate, they would like to play more of a role in society, be more of a part of their community, but they don't know how. They haven't built the institutions yet to that would help. African immigrants haven't yet built the institutions that would help us integrate, and so people remain turned towards the homeland because that seems easier than figuring out how to create a whole new identity, a whole new life here in the U.S. And obviously, this is a bit of a generalization. Experiences vary, but it's a common pattern, which I think anyone who's worked in African immigrant communities will tell you they see again and again. And I think it's a challenge that we have to address, because really the best way that we can help the countries of our birth, the continent of our birth, is by building something here that we can then, creating lives and identities and assets and resources here that we can help our home with.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that in a second. But I wanted to ask you first, if there's an immigrant, an African immigrant listening to our interview, what would you suggest that they do as soon as they arrive to the U.S.?
That's a really interesting question. I think that first off, people really have to address the immediate challenges of survival, of having a place to live, a job, and getting the basically rooted and planted here. So I think that's the first thing people have to address, and I guess the sort of advice or support that I would give to people is that there are a lot more resources out there than you think. A lot of times people feel like they have to be on their own, they have to be completely self-sufficient, and here in New York and in other cities we find there are lots of resources out there, many of them free or offered by nonprofits at very low cost, to help people with anything from housing discrimination or to to employment training, to English as a second language and getting a degree. So I would say look for those resources. I think the second thing that is really critical, and that just I see when I interact with African immigrants, is the people who are most connected to other members of their community often are the ones who thrive the most. So
you're talking about other immigrants?
Yes, so other immigrants from Africa, other immigrants from their same country of origin. People find jobs through their ethnic networks. They find housing. They find assistance when they're in a crisis. Someone gets evicted or a family member dies, and the strength of someone's network is often the difference between survival and being destroyed. But I think that a lot of times people are cut off from those networks. We especially see people who come through the diversity visa program because they're not brought here by a family member. They're not brought here with a group of refugees. They're brought in as an individual, and often, there's a lot of people back home, who are depending on them, so they expect them to send money home or otherwise help out. And so I've found that often folks in the diversity visa program are often more isolated from their ethnic network. So I would say don't try to go it alone. Connect to your community. And then I guess the last thing I would say is it's the U.S. is your country too. By coming here, by becoming a resident, by working hard and paying taxes, that gives you a right to participate in the life of your community. So whether that's on your neighborhood or in your national government or your school district board, get involved and speak up and advocate for yourself and for your community.
So how do organizations like yours how do they connect with the new immigrants that just arrived to the U.S.? How do you find them?
So we found people through lots of different ways. One is that, again, I said that there aren't enough organizations helping people integrate, but there are actually lots of immigrant associations, organizations, religious congregations, tons of organizations, and we often find that even though those organizations can't meet the demand for everything, that they are very vibrant, that they have 50, 60 members, that they meet every month, that they that when someone gets married or is has to be buried, that they're the first point of departure, and they have a lot of trust and respect from their members. So one of our first steps has been to reach out through those institutions, those associations and organizations, and literally just saying, look, you're having a meeting next month, can we come and talk to people about their housing rights or about help that's available with immigration? We've also gone literally up and down the streets of neighborhoods where there are African-owned businesses, and gone into everything from food markets to braid shops to places that send money home, money transfer places, and said, can you share this information with your customers? We had one of our best activists and members. We reached her through an association, and she ended up hosting a meeting in the back of her shop to all the customers who come into her every week. She did a sign up and signed up a list of people who were coming. Then we came and did a presentation. We're about to start a new housing assistance program, and part of the way that we plan to reach people is just literally spending time in the housing court and talking to people in the hallways who don't have legal representation or any assistance with their housing cases. So it takes a real effort, and you have to go where people are in order to find them.
Have you heard of maybe you're working with them already, African Services in New York?
Absolutely. African Services Committee is a fantastic organization. They've been one of our earliest and closest partner organizations. They were founded by an Ethiopian immigrant to the U.S. I believe over 30 years ago, and have been serving African immigrants here in the New York area for all that time. And they've been enthusiastic about our project getting off the ground, because they say, look, we're meeting, we're working super hard to just meet a very defined set of needs, and there's a whole other set of needs that are beyond our scope that go unaddressed. And so they've been a fantastic ally to work with.
Right, awesome. I interviewed Stephanie Kaplan from African Services. It's great. It's amazing work that they're doing. And I'm really happy that, even though they exist, there are still so many opportunities for people who want to create something new for their communities. Mm-hmm. So do you partner with other similar organizations?
Absolutely. We work with a whole range of organizations. What I found when I started doing this work here in New York is that there were actually a lot of great, nonprofit and government agencies that were providing really good services, from legal assistance to housing law to assistance with public benefits. And what was lacking was the outreach to the community, and that kind of building a bridge between the people who need the services and the people who are providing the services. So rather than, offer a bunch of duplicative services ourselves, we've been really focused on the outreach. And some of the organizations that we've helped connect people to, or that have partnered with to provide services, include, as you mentioned, African Services Committee, but also the single stop centers, Goddard Riverside Single Stop, academic institutions like we've worked with the law clinic at Hofstra University School of Law, Urban Justice Center, which does great community lawyering work in partnership with community-based organizations, is working with us to develop this housing assistance program, and that's not to mention all the various associations that we've worked with who have been really instrumental in getting the word out. So partnership is really the name of the game for us.
The associations that you're talking about, are they governmental or community kind of oriented?
They're community associations. They're sort of what you might call ethnic associations.
Like
Sometimes.
African businesses.
Exactly.
Okay.
And sometimes a specific community, so for example, in the Ghanaian community where we've done a lot of work, there's an association that's working with Ghanaian veterans who are here in the U.S., or people from specific states, or women's groups, or sometimes recreational groups like soccer groups. There's a group of African community leaders and activists that work with the president of the borough of the Bronx, the African Advisory Council, the Bronx Borough president. That's been really instrumental in putting together community events serving the African community. So there are lots of there's a rich kind of network of organizations out there, but there's still a need to kind of move our work up to a bigger scale.
So is there a way for you to reach out to Africans who want to immigrate to the U.S. before they do that, so before they leave Africa?
That's a really interesting question. At this point in our development, there isn't. I do think that I think that for folks who are on the point of immigrating, a lot of their contact is with the government, with the consulates, or the consulates or the embassies of their country, and people have differing kind of relationships with their consulates and embassies. People who are coming in refugee status, fleeing their country, are obviously going to have a very different relationship than people who come here as on through a diversity visa or through family reunification. But what we've seen in other immigrant communities is that those consulates have played a really central role in educating people about their rights, not just related to immigration and immigration law, often related to things like the right to a minimum wage, or connecting people with resources if they experience problems, or healthcare. So I think as we grow and develop, developing partnerships with the consulates and embassies that are often a first resource for people in this country could be a way that we reach people, and potentially, as you say, maybe even reach people before they emigrate to get some orientation to what they're coming into.
Yeah, because I was talking to somebody once, and actually before I started doing my research on different organizations for immigrants, I had no idea they even existed. So I thought, well, why would somebody help you for free? And it's just not something that you think of. You just think that you're going to be all by on your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had a theory, and I'm so happy that you were confirming that. It was not just a theory, but I have seen women and men also who immigrated somewhere. They really want to give back to their communities back home, and they start nonprofits or organizations that support people there. What has been your experience so far with this?
I think that's absolutely true. I think it's true across immigrant communities, whether, wherever people are coming from, Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. I think people want to do something positive, and are doing positive things for their communities and their families. And some people, it's very informal and individual. They're sending back remittances, or they're sending a little bit of money every month to support someone, or paying someone's school fees. And some people are doing more larger scale, coordinated efforts. And some people have even, traditional community vehicles that they do this through. Where I'm from in Ethiopia, we have an institution that's called the Mahaber, and it's a group of people who get together, and about 10 people or what have you. And it's in the first instance sort of a social thing. We get together and we catch up and we bond, but then we all take on a project, a community project, like helping to fix up a school, or build a road in a community where we have some connection. And that's not unique to Ethiopia. Lots of communities have some kind of tradition of collective assistance and mutual aid, like this. So you're starting to see more and more people at different levels of society recognize the important roles that diasporas play. In the independent side, on the civil society side, you see great groups that are trying to harness the power of diasporas for community development in Africa. There's a great group that was started recently called Africans in the Diaspora. And what they're doing is they're actually organizing contributions from the African diaspora and partnering with community-based organizations on the continent to fund them and to do direct philanthropy from the diaspora. So that's a great model. All the way up to multilateral institutions like the United Nations and the World Bank that are saying, how can we harness the capital and the technical skills and the goodwill of diasporas to drive international development. And I think it's a really important model. I think I think two things are true. One is, I think that as members of the diasporas, as people who have emigrated, we have to be somewhat humble and recognize that, our day-to-day reality living here in the U.S., no matter how recently we emigrated, is quite different from the day-to-day reality of many people who are living in the countries where we emigrated from. So we have to, we should play a leadership role, but we need to do it in partnership with groups back in our home countries. But I also think it's true that compared often to these big international development organizations or agencies, we know a little bit more about what it's like on the ground. That if we're a group of people and saying, hey, let's send money to our hometown, to build a school, we often are able to say, what, if we give money to this person instead of that person, then the thing's more likely to get built. So that kind of knowledge and connection with people, on the ground, is a real asset. And I think we can play a very important role. And the last thing I'll say on that is just, I think it's not just a matter of checkbooks. I think it's also a matter of civic engagement. We've seen here in the U.S. that diasporas can play an incredibly important role in U.S. foreign policy, and so there are examples that that come easily to mind. The Cuban community in Miami, for example. The U.S.'s relationship with Israel is another that comes to mind often. But there are other examples that are less well known. For example, the Armenian community. Especially in the Los Angeles area, but throughout the country, has played a really important role in U.S. policy towards Armenia. Even Americans of Irish descent have influenced U.S. policy. So diasporas can play a very important role in U.S. foreign policy, in everything from how we address humanitarian crises to how we distribute aid, towards whether we normalize relationships with a country or not. I think that has to be part of the role of the diaspora, in addition to direct cash assistance or technical assistance. Just trying to organize information on the web that if people want to give to groups that are doing work in a specific region or part of the world, here are some organizations that you can give through. So that's another example of how diasporas might be engaged, financially as well as. But I think what you're seeing, and we saw this recently around the high-level dialogue that happened at the UN around diasporas and development, is that diasporas are saying, diaspora groups are saying, it's great that you want to engage us for our knowledge and technical skills. It's great that you, want us to contribute financially to the development of our countries and birth. But we also have opinions about issues like democracy, human rights, migration policies that favor people and communities and not just states and governments. So I think that that's part of our role too, as diasporas, as members of the diaspora, say, look, we're not just piggy banks or workhorses. We want to be part of the conversation about how do we raise the standard for everyone in the countries where we immigrated from.
Amaha, I wanted to ask you about the representation of gender representation of immigrants, in immigrant communities. Are there more men or women that you serve or that you see?
Statistical research, that we've done on African immigrant communities in particular, there's, on the big level, there's almost parity. There's a slight predominance by the numbers of men to women, but it's in the range of 52-48 or something like that. It differs somewhat community by community, and specifically how people emigrated. So, for example, a lot of the French-speaking West African communities here in New York City, there is, to some degree, overrepresentation of men. There's more men than women. And it's partly a function of the fact that there are some internationally divided families. So, there are men who come to the U.S. to work, but they're married and have children back in their country of origin. That said, there's a lot of phenomenal women's organizations and women leaders who are playing really important roles in African immigrant communities. A lot of times they are the kind of connective tissue that brings everything together, and not just in associations or in families, but in businesses. There are a ton of African women entrepreneurs doing everything from running braid shops to selling food to working as professionals in finance and law. So there's a tremendous diversity. And if we're going to be frank, there's often some frictions and challenges that come with renegotiating gender roles in a new country. Speaking from the experience of Ethiopia, there's often more strict gender roles or gender hierarchies, and then people come here and things get shaken up a little bit. And so I think, as in so many other areas, African immigrants are trying to find new identities and new ways of relating to each other here in this country.
So do women feel more like there are more opportunities for them in New York or just in the U.S. in general?
I think that both for women and for men, I think that the search for opportunity is a big driving factor that brings people to the U.S. and as well as sometimes escape from various forms of persecution, some of which include gender-based violence. So there's as many kind of differing stories and differing experiences as there are individuals, but I would say that yes, there are you can't help but confront the fact that that there are differing opportunities in the workplace and in society for women in U.S. society. But that's not to underestimate the important leadership role that women play in lots of traditional African societies. I can say that often, what are nominally kind of patriarchal societies with men at the head, women are doing the real work, and women are our societies and economies wouldn't function without women, and that's true throughout Africa as well.
Right. Amaha, thank you so much for talking about your organization and your work. I will share the links of how our listeners can find you and your organization below the interview.
Great. Thank you so much for letting me be part of your program.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Immigrant Women Talk podcast. I would love to get to know you, so come over to immigrantwomentalk.com and leave a comment. Let me know about your challenges, and I will find an expert who will offer a solution. If you would like to join the community of immigrant women, connect with a guest or with me, go to immigrantwomentalk.com. I'm Galina Bilaeva, and I will talk to you next time.